always hear in the world, I wanted to ask you guys too. So we hear the word Mac versus PC and all this is better. I was a primary Windows user. Now I think it's balanced, although I use Mac a little bit more. Sorry, Windows. And for us blind bitches, us blind guys, we have different things, softwares that we use. But Jose was wondering about the differences between two of our softwares. Because Apple is not just Apple Computer anymore. With the introduction of the iPod, the iPhone, all of that, really, they should have changed before. But in 2007, they switched from Apple Computer Inc. to Apple Inc. So Apple Incorporated. So, Jose, I don't remember, but what two softwares did you want to compare?
Yeah, so recently I was watching some YouTube videos about the new iPad OS that's coming out. What is it? The iPad OS
15.
15?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I was seeing is people were being disappointed about it because they were limiting the RAM that any app is able to use up to 5 gigabytes of RAM. But these iPads are coming out with, 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes. And they were marketing the iPad as, the new computer, so you could use that instead of your computer. But, if you're limiting the software like that, well, I mean, if the software is limiting, the hardware like that, I was wondering what's the difference between, Mac OS versus iPad OS that, like how do you decide if you want the iPad, even though you can't use it, 100%? Does it really matter? Because you know the iPad OS is has its own apps, that are for iPads. So I don't know if it really matters that you're being limited if everything is already optimized for the iPad. You know the apps are optimized for the software. So my question to you guys is, what are the differences between Mac OS versus iPad OS? That like if I'm gonna get a MacBook Air versus like an iPad Pro, because the iPad Pro is more expensive,
Yeah.
and it's like what, $400 more or something like that.
The starting price is $799.
Yeah, but I mean for like the same features, I guess, for the same memory and the same RAM.
And so I'll start it off, I guess, as the leader of the podcast. So the first thing that you got to realize is Apple's making their MacBook Air, their M1, more competitive, and it's about fucking time, effing time. I'm trying not to curse, but I can't. That Apple finally focuses on the goddamn MacBook Air because they always made it that computer that was like that little sibling that no one freaking cared about. And I would never recommend the MacBook Air. Now I would, right? But you have to ask yourself a bunch of questions before I get into the software and the limitations. What do I need? What do I need? Okay, I'm from the South. Besides barbecue, what do you need, right? If I'm a if I'm a journalist, I could get an iPad Pro, right, or an iPad Air 4. But for this case, we'll use the iPad Pro because it has all the features of M1. If I'm a journalism student, I'm possibly and a writer, maybe I'm going to use the backlit keyboard. I'm going to attach an accessory to the iPad because see, the iPad comes with a touchscreen, and its purpose now by Apple is, oh well, we want you to be able to use a computer, but I would attach an accessory because the Mac comes right. You might have your MacBook and it comes already with the keyboard and trackpad, and the MacBook Air, as you mentioned, comes with function keys and the screen. Right? The iPad, you have to buy the keyboard separate. Stupid, but that's kind of that's Microsoft's way too, and Samsung. That's how they make their money, right? So, what they, you know, in this point, I would say you have to decide what you need. Okay, well, you know what? I'm more of a guy that I'm not really going to use the touchscreen as much, or maybe I'm a designer, I'm an innovator, I'm an artist. Okay, well, if you're a designer, innovator, artist, video editor, you might want to get the iPad. Why? Because iPad has the Magic Keyboard that you can switch the angles, adjust it, and it's got a trackpad on the Magic Keyboard. But also, you want to get um, the Apple Pencil because you can draw, you can use it as like a paintbrush, you can write a canvas and use things like Affinity Photo, Procreate, and all of that. And if you want to video edit as well, you can use a lot of great apps. But again, you're limited there because they don't make Final Cut and Adobe Audition and Adobe Premiere and Premiere Rush. Well, maybe Premiere Rush, but most of those apps that are on the Mac that are Apple made products, you can't use them on the iPad. So now you're going, okay, well, now I need to get on the Mac. So there are different apps that you can edit with the iPad, right? Now, in terms of the MacBook, everyone has a different usage for it. You know, I type all day. I'm more used to a computer. I need the capacity of a Mac because it's more than the iPad. Although now they're making the freaking memory or the memory just so much better. Like the 2 terabytes. Who needs 2 terabytes in an iPad, right? But they're doing that, and so again, you have to base it on your needs. And you could say, well, I need the iPad Pro. Well, if you want to go cheaper, you could get the iPad Air 4. It's literally almost the iPad Pro, except for like it's point 0.2, maybe 1.2 inches smaller than the 11-inch display, right? It has Touch ID instead of Face ID. It doesn't have the LiDAR sensor, the LiDAR sensor, right? But it has most of the features. But if you're saying, oh, I want M1, okay, well, there you go, right? Now, in terms of the software, I don't like that they're limiting it because what happens in a computer, right? The space that's limited is not your RAM, it's your not the memory on your computer, right? If you've got a 256 gig computer, you'll use about 245, 250, and then the rest of it, where does it go? Well, it goes to the other systems in the computer and helps with that, right? I
It
don't
differs
know.
with mine actually.
What was that?
What?
Mine is actually different. Because I have a mid 2015, I cannot actually use the whole 256 that I have actually. The system is using a lot more than say 6 gigs. So like I'm even more limited than the newer Macs these days. And I'm not sure it's because I have the Intel processor instead of the M1 chip or anything like that. I'm not sure if it has to do anything
Well, it
with the
depends
old
on
hardware.
what your system is using as well. Because again, if you're using up a lot of you're using apps that eat up a lot of CPU and GPU, right? Something's gonna give, and it might be
So,
your memory.
so if I could rephrase my question, I think maybe might help because I guess my real question would be if I could get the same things on the MacBook Air that the iPad Pro has, you know, if you buy the keyboard for the iPad Pro, the only thing you really don't have is the touchscreen. And also, you're not being limited, by the software. So my question is, would you recommend an iPad Pro and why? If I could get all the same things and maybe even a little more on the Air.
So this first generation, for me, I don't know what Jesus Christ thinks, because we all got to go by him, his disciples. But the religious folk are gonna kill me. But all my Christians, maybe the Catholics. But Jesus, keep them away from me, please. But um, bless me, Jesus. Anyway, for me, I personally wouldn't go with the MacBook Air for one reason, and that's that it only comes with one fan. And what happens is with the new M1 that the processor has to throttle down the energy and to cool down the system,
Yeah,
whereas the
but
MacBook Pro
the iPad Pro doesn't have a fan either.
doesn't have a fan.
So they're
But
the
right,
same.
so my point is what I was getting to. I think the M1 MacBook Air is a great product, and I would recommend it. The way I look at the MacBook Air is it's marketed to people who are looking for a cheap version into the Macs, right? Into the Mac ecosystem. And they're looking for something that's reliable, And you can use it to edit, especially with the M1. They can use it for web browsing. They can use it for work, and it's a reliable computer. And especially if you're not looking to do heavy editing, which is where I would suggest go to the MacBook Pro. Although the MacBook Air is capable, iPad Pro, the reason I got it was certain college apps worked better with the iPad. The camera, right? Because I am in journalism. I wanted a portable tablet, something I could carry, something I could airdrop with, use certain phone features that I couldn't do with the Mac. I would only get the the iPad Pro if you're really going to be needing that LiDAR sensor, if you're really going to be needing that much of camera, that big of a display, number two. Some people might say, yeah, because, like if you have low vision, yeah, that might be useful to me, right? Maybe you're doing music and you need something to have a good bass, right? But honestly, if someone was going to go get an iPad Pro, if they were just to tell me, look, I just need something to work on, I'm not going to really do a lot of heavy video editing and maybe I'm not going to be doing too much design, I would say, you know what, go for the iPad Air, which is cheaper and literally has like 95% of the iPad Pro's features. So honestly, like if you were to say, okay, which iPad should I get if you were to compare, I'd go iPad Air, iPad Air 4. I can't talk. But honestly, Jose, I would get a MacBook Air. And number one, it's cheaper than the starting MacBook Pro at $1,200. Number two, the M1 provides a great chip. Everything is, instead of the CPU, the GPU, the RAM, all of that being separated in individual parts on the motherboard, it's all in one chip. So your computer doesn't have to switch from one to the other to transfer the data. Each one can get the data from each other, right? I know I'm getting really techie, but that's why we're here. But aside from that, it's a good product. You can take notes. You can write your articles, write newspapers, Herbert. You can write your papers if you're in school. If you're in work, it's a great computer. I think Jesus would agree. iPad Pro, I would say, is for the pros, the professionals, the designers, the journalism students like me, right? I would say MacBook Air is a good computer. Jesus?
A quick question for you though. So you're taking the the MacBook Pro out of the equation, and so if you can, because all the stuff that you just mentioned on the iPad Pro, which is pro features, you can get done on a MacBook Pro, which now has the M1 chip as well that they're coming up with. So if you can do the same thing on a MacBook Pro that you can do on an iPad Pro, why get the much more expensive MacBook Pro then? Of course, it has more fans and this and that, but again, you can use the Apple Pencil on it. Yeah, I mean the MacBook Pro, you can use Logic Pro X and stuff like that. But if you're just a designer, you have to draw. There's no reason to get the MacBook Pro because Logic Pro X and all that stuff are mainly for editing music and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that's why I said, that's why I said, if you're a designer, if you are someone that needs a lot of illustrations, you're an animator, you're a designer, then yeah, I would absolutely go for a Pro because you have that Apple Pencil where you can draw, where you can do all that kind of thing. But if you're not, maybe you're just a guy like me who makes videos, right? You guys are going to be making a podcast, and I'll ask you about that at the end, right? But so if you're just going to be doing that, but you're not writing, don't get an iPad Pro. If you really do want an iPad and you want the features of the iPad, hey, I still get to use iOS apps, and I can afford the iPad Air 4 more than I can afford the MacBook Pro M1 that starts at $1,200. Go for that, right? But right, so if you're like me who just edits videos and all of that, but you're not a designer per se, shit, just get the MacBook Pro if you want. But if someone like Jose, right, is getting into the Apple market, maybe they're like, look, I want to buy a Mac, but I don't need a lot of the heavy things that maybe I just need one fan. I'm okay, right? MacBook Air is a really good starting price. MacBook Pro? Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jesus, it's a fucking amazing computer.
So